everyone has a friend or a relative who was involved in the Second World War in some capacity. In many ways, we have all spent our lives in the shadow of that war. But the taken for granted notion that these veterans are still available to talk to is in fact no longer true. The memories, stories, and secrets of the Second World War are in fact slipping away. I'm going to share with you how archaeology can help preserve this history. Can anyone identify this skull? Any zoo archaeologists or enthusiasts in the house? Guesses. Did I hear dog? Oh, excellent. Well, you're much more reasonable than I, because when my trowel first scraped against this skull and the dirt began to fall off, I was sure I'd stumbled upon a baby T-Rex. Which would have been quite odd, considering this was an archaeological dig and not a paleontological dig. Not to mention the skull was surrounded on all sides by tin cans and bottles and other trash datable to the 1940s. But luckily for my research project, if not for my ego, I had a faunal osteologist on site with me that day. She took one look at it and quickly corrected me. This is, of course, no T-Rex, but rather the complete skull of a Canis lupus familiaris, in common terms, the domestic dog. This canine skull, the skull of a black lab specifically, was nevertheless an intriguing find. And it was just one of the 50,000 artifacts that I excavated from the site of an abandoned prisoner of war camp that held Nazi Afrika Korps soldiers in Manitoba, Canada during the Second World War. The British had too many German POWs to handle on their own, and thus shipped as many as possible to colonies and former colonies. Canada accepted about 30,000 of them. Some of the historic trash I excavated would have been left behind by these 6 fellows right here, including one of those black labs. Humans and their trash are, of course, intimately connected. But contrary to what is sometimes said, I don't believe that trash is just a reflection of culture. I truly believe that trash is the essence of our culture. And much can be said about a people or a community or a culture or an entire country by what they throw away. But archaeologists have, of course, been looking at trash for several hundred years now. But turning to the trash of modern times puts us in a unique position of being able to compare results from excavations, or artifacts, with living people and what living people have to say. With the death of Florence Green, a veteran of the Women's Royal Air Force last year, we unequivocally reached the end of the era of living memory for the First World War. But now we're reaching another milestone. We're entering the final phase of living memory of the Second World War. But we're at a unique moment. We're at a time when it is still possible to study the Second World War through the archives, through archaeological excavations, and by talking to the people who were actually there. Riding Mountain Camp was located in southwestern Manitoba, inside a Canadian national park, Riding Mountain National Park. The camp operated for just 2 short years, from fall 1943 to fall 1945. It was a work camp, and the 500 prisoners there were expected to labor 6 days per week logging in the forest. The camp was made up of 15 very sturdy buildings, and it was uncommonly well outfitted even by Canadian standards. It had electricity, running water, radio, television. Not television. I was testing you guys. Showers, flushing toilets, all the comforts of home, in fact. But it had no fence and no guard towers. And the POWs were even free to roam the woods within a couple miles of camp. But with no fence to stop them, they, of course, didn't stay within those bounds. But actually, that's another story. This is what the site of the camp looks like from the air today. No buildings stand, and in fact, on the ground, it really just looks like an empty field. But you can see in that photo hiking trails. Many a hiker actually passes right through this spot every summer and spring, with, in fact, no idea that they're rambling through the site of a former prisoner of war camp that held 500 Nazis. Tangible signs of the camp at the site are subtle, but they're nevertheless there. The raised lines you see here reveal the footprints of where the camp buildings once stood. Though these footprints are barely visible when you're in the field itself, I was able to piece together the placement of each of the buildings through this ground elevation model. And in addition to the hidden building foundations, with tall grasses cleared away, piles of trash were also revealed. Complete metal garbage cans were tossed here on the day the camp was abandoned. Those cans were full of garbage themselves. They were last touched by human hands in late 1945. I located 6 different trash dumps in the forest around the camp, and I excavated a sampling of each one. And by comparing the location of these dumps with the placement of the buildings in my map, I was able to connect the trash heaps with specific groups of people within the camp. For example, one dump could be positively associated just with the Canadian Guards. Another one, the one I'm crouching in this photo, belonged to the prisoners. In that half-meter yellow square you see right there, you can spot a Listerine bottle, a harmonica, a whiskey flask, shoe polish, Portuguese sardines, talcum powder, and a distinctive blue milk of magnesia bottle. The POWs clearly expended much effort in their personal grooming habits. I amassed hundreds of telling artifacts, such as these combs, but also cologne, toothpaste, razors, aftershave, mouthwash, creams, hair pomades, you name it. Since they had their basic needs taken care of by the Canadians, and since they were well treated, they had 3 hots and a cot, as one of my informants was fond of saying. They had the time and resources to spare on seemingly less important things like aftershave and cologne. The moment I discovered this tin, I was elated, but I have to be entirely honest. I wasn't just excited about what the tin might tell us about the POW camp or about the lives of the POWs. Rather, I was excited that I had finally located that one iconic artifact that every archaeology project needs to keep the grant money coming in. Until I produced an artifact with a swastika on it, even a tiny half-centimeter swastika such as this one, the future of my project was in serious doubt. But this tin and the 11 others like it that were recovered did in fact contributing for valid reasons too. Every single one of these tins, once containing a disc of Nazi-approved chocolate, was found in a trash heap created not by the German POWs, but by the Canadian Guards. Combined with other evidence, this revealed that the POWs were in fact trading these chocolates that came out of their German Red Cross packages with the Guards for things like alcohol. These are some of the POWs that were interned at Riding Mountain Work Camp. The young man on the far left in the front row is Joseph Gabski. This is his prisoner identification card, complete with mugshot, which was issued to him when he arrived in Canada. In 2010, I found Mr. Gabski, and of all the places in the world this man could have been living, he was in a town called Chico, California, which was driving distance from Stanford, California, where I was living at the time. Mr. Gabski and I went for breakfast to IHOP, his favorite spot, where he told me about his life as a child in Nazi Germany, as a teenage tank mechanic under Rommel in Egypt, as a young adult prisoner in Canada, and as a heavy-duty mechanic for the next 50 years in Chico. I was planning on seeing Joseph Gabski again to really take my time and record what he said, but Mr. Gabski passed away just a few weeks after my first visit with him, and I wasn't able to see him again. Luckily, Mr. Gabski wasn't my only informant. These are some of the other men I found alive in Canada, United States, and in Germany, who many years ago were interned at Riding Mountain. Klaus Maier, when I arrived at his house in Hamburg, pulled out an old shoebox. Inside that shoebox was his wartime memorabilia, including his photo albums. His grown grandchildren, who you see in that photo, were stunned. Grandpa had never before pulled out this box. He had never shown it to anybody his entire life. My visit prompted him to start thinking about that time, and he realized that it was possible to bring this box out. And in that moment, Mr. Maier's photographs saw the light of day for the first time in 70 years. Collectively, the POWs I found had some pretty surprising things to say. They all spoke of Canada with smiles on their faces and with twinkles in their eyes. They said that Riding Mountain was more summer camp than work camp. The message was clear. The POWs lived better in Canada as prisoners than they had as soldiers in Europe or in Africa or any of the other places they had been, and certainly better than they had lived in a destroyed post-war Germany. In fact, many of the POWs wished to stay in North America after the war, but they weren't allowed. Every single one was repatriated to Germany or wherever they were from. But like Joseph Gapsky from Chico, it was only in the 1950s that they began to emigrate to Canada and the United States and elsewhere. My informants all told me that they were treated with respect by the Canadians and that they were provided with everything they needed. And yes, the archaeological and the photographic evidence also point to the suggestion that the POWs were indeed treated quite well. They were even allowed to carve their own canoes and paddle them on nearby Whitewater Lake. We found several surviving canoes just sitting on the surface, lost in this deep forest these past 70 years. Things, or material culture in anthropological jargon, can be windows into the past, present, and future. Archaeology is one way of making connections between these old things and people and events. One entryway into telling stories, for creating knowledge, or for interpreting the world around us. The archaeology of modern times is in the unique position of being able to connect these old material things, or recent material things for that matter, with living people. But it was only through this research project that I realized that we're at a very unique moment. One where it is possible to study the war through the archives, through archaeology, and by speaking to the people who were actually there. Simple math tells us that the possibility for this type of activity, these types of interactions, will be largely gone in the next 5 to 10 years. 3 out of 8 of my best informants have passed away. What this means is that we are on the cusp of the end of the era of living memory for the Second World War. This is truly our final opportunity to meet face to face with the men and women that experienced that war firsthand. For those of you with the interest and resources to formally study these living archives of the Second World War, I implore you to take that on. These men and women will not be around much longer. For those of you with family or friends with memories of those times, I encourage you to seek those people out and share those moments with them. Thank you very much.